Welcome to the space between. Authenticity. Being your authentic self is a massive part of the new age that we have moved into. In the time of social media, celebrity, and material worship, authenticity has been rightfully called into question. How do we find and live our authentic selves when so much is pulling us from our true essence? How do we navigate stepping into our power? It's not that easy, is it? Brandon Moore Johnson is a husband, father, content creator, and realtor who lives an authentic life both on and offline. He shares how stepping into your authentic self in everything you do is key to unlocking your full potential in this world. Join us as we connect through conversation. Hello, world. Welcome to another episode of the Space Between podcast. My name is Alyson Rixner. And I'm so excited to have my new dear friend, Brandon Moore Johnson, joining us today for authenticity. Welcome to the Space Between, Brandon.
I'm so glad to be here. I've been looking forward to this conversation for a while now.
Absolutely. And I know that our listeners are going to take so much from this conversation today because authenticity is never been more important. And you and I have shared many conversations not on a public forum, and now we're bringing it public.
Well, let's do it.
Yeah. So today we're going to talk about authenticity. And the reason that I wanted to bring this up, we are recording this towards the middle to end of November 2024, and it's been a wild year. I think we've been called in a different way to step into a more true, more authentic version of ourselves. We've been pushed and pulled into it. But I think the end result has been beautiful. And you and I met through our work and we've become friends. And I was very taken by your more recent content that you've been putting out. And it was so authentic and so real to me. That is the reason I reached out to you. I was just like, who is this guy? So why don't you tell us a little bit about who you are?
Well, of course, my name is Brandon Moore Johnson. I was born January 13th, so that makes me a Capricorn for those who care.
Love that. It's a good
that's
start.
Only for you. I would never ever mention that otherwise. Yeah, I was born in California, raised in Arizona, moved here to Florida in 2010. Grew up in a single family household, which frames single parent household, which frames a lot of how I think and process, and grew up without a dad, struggling through leadership and having just interesting leadership experiences and just kind of taking every experience that I had and trying to mold it into a way that helps benefit me in my life. And so I can be the best person that I can be. So, that's a little bit of a nugget because you can go down all sorts of kind of paths. So,
yeah, and you are a husband, a dad, a realtor, a content creator. What else? I mean, you wear so many hats, which is very indicative of the times that we're living in, which I sort of love, right?
But they're all kind of in the same framework. So, you talk about your purpose. It's like the purpose in which it drives me is the same across all those. So they all lead to a common goal of bettering myself so I could be better for my family, so I can be better for the community. That's the framework around how I live my life. Yeah.
I love that. And I'm 44. How old are you? I think it's interesting to talk about our age in this authentic vein, right? Because I do think there's a reason for that. How old are you today?
Yeah, I'm 34.
Okay. I mean, you're just a little bit younger than me. Fine.
Yeah.
But I do think that as we get older, we have more opportunities to step into our authentic selves, our true selves. Would you agree with that?
Yeah. Absolutely. You can look back. I think I always say hindsight's 2020. So I think the ability to look back at your history and where you come from is what allows you to have growth. So it allows you kind of to direct for your future. So if you don't look at where you've come from and the past that you have, I think with age, which is why, I think age and wisdom kind of go hand in hand, but also experience does too. So the more experiences you have, which means the more time you have on the earth, it just means there's going to be more things that you can experience and increase, your own ability to view the world. And I think that's where our growth as just humans come from.
That's so beautiful. It is. It is a different perspective shift when you step into
Hmm.
your authentic self. And in the space between, which I've dubbed this interesting time post COVID that we're living through, and so many things are changing and so many things are transforming, it's very hard to not be who you are because there seems to be, like I said, there's this push pull. There seems to be an unmasking of a lot of the
Hmm.
BS layers that live either with people or institutions or structures. And that is one of the reasons why I'm giving you credit for this theme. I can't even believe it wasn't on my list. And it just seems so important now. I'm like, how could I have missed this one? But thanks to you,
Yeah.
I didn't miss it because we have really gone through something so transformational as individuals and as a collective that it's becoming harder not to be the true us.
Hmm. Well, I think it's really difficult to align the person that's on the inside that correlates with the person that exists on the outside. So the thing that I remember being in college is like, and I say it's like it was this little Brandon. Like there's this little Brandon that was inside me that like was my true authentic self. And I knew that I could be that person. But for whatever reason, there was a disconnect between what people saw and what I was portraying. And so I was like, there's this person inside me that desperately wants to get out, and I have no idea how to get this person out. And that was one of the things that caused me to go through this like 10-year journey of self-discovery. And year by year, process by process, it finally got to the point where the little brand on the inside was the person that people were seeing. And so that's now how why I believe I'm living in my truer authentic self, that the person that I see myself to be is the person that's existing in the world. And that wasn't always the case. And so I think a lot of
Right.
people have a really, really hard time going through that, where they're like, I know who I want to be, but I just can't seem to, like, I'm either messing up or like, uh, I keep saying things I don't want to say, or I keep having the friends that I don't like really want to have. Like, I want to be a good husband, but I'm making bad choices. Like, I want to be a good father. And unless you go through that ability and you work internally, like to bring that person out, then you're not going to get to a point where you can actually feel like, no, I'm the same person that I am in my content. I'm the same person that I am on stage. I'm the same person that I am talking to my friends. Like that consistency across the board, I think is really hard to get to.
Wow. Little Brandon, I felt that when you said that. That
Yeah.
is, and that could be inner child. There's so many ways. I won't go down this,
Yeah.
psychological route. Talk to me about when you realized little Brandon existed. I mean, you were pretty young. What were
Yeah, I was
those
in my
moments
early
like?
20s. I was in my
Yeah.
early 20s. Yeah, I don't know why I operate this way or why I think the way I do. And looking back, it could be a lot of the fact that I grew up without a dad.
Okay.
So trying to find like self-worth, trying to find, hey, there's this missing piece of me that I don't really know what it is. And I'm the kind of person that'll always seek out something or somebody else to help me become more aware or to kind of fill that hole. I never really knew what it was. So that kind of happened in college where so I went to a Christian school. I was on the worship team and I was one of the main leaders in a pretty big school. And I had one of my RDs, resident directors, because I was also an RA at the time too in leadership. And he was like,
Okay.
you know, if God could use anybody, and he's like, why you? Like, why are you on stage? What's the reason for you to be there? And I was like, I have no idea. Like, I
Yeah.
don't
You're
know.
in
It was a
college. You're
genuine
like,
thing.
I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah. So I do what I do and I get very self-reflective of my life and where I'm going at. And then I kind of discovered it where I was like, there's a person that I want to be. I didn't codify it like as little brand until later, but there's this person that I really want to be and I really want people to see, but like it's not coming out. And I think there's a perception that other people had of me that I didn't feel was right. So being in SU worship, like on the worship team, they were very hipster-esque kind of people. They looked
Okay.
hipster, they dressed hipster, and I'm over here not dressing like that, not looking like them. But then they labeled me that because I was associated with them. And I was like, well, that's not me. That's not my true authentic self. I just happen to be in this environment. So I started going through process of like, okay, cool, let me try different friend groups. So like my friends used to get mad at me, my core group, because I would just hop friend groups all the time. I was like, well, I'm gonna go be friends with athletes. I'm gonna go be friends because I didn't know anything about them. One of the things, so I'm half black, half white. I grew up in Arizona. Most of my friends were Mexican or white, and I never grew up with the black side of my family. I didn't have any black friends. I didn't have my first black friend um until I came to Florida. And so there's this group of black people that I was like, oh, I know nothing about that side of me. And so I became friends. I started learning about like that part of who I was and discovering, a whole lot of things. So I think to answer the question is when did I know? I just think I always kind of had this knowing of there was somebody that I really wanted to be because I was really big in leadership, but I couldn't share it or show it to other people. And I knew that people saw me in a way that I didn't want them to see me. And so it's kind of just um, as I started going through the self discovery, that's when I labeled him like there is this little Brandon that's my true like self that I want to be, not just little Brandon. I just want it to be all Brandon. Um, and that's where, yeah, I don't know how else to explain it.
That's
It's
where, no, that was
yeah,
amazing. Wow. Thank you for sharing all of that, first of
yeah,
all. It sounds like a really, really interesting, introspective, and deep path at a
hmm
young age that kicked off what you said was essentially a 10-year journey to present day,
yeah,
figuring out how to take that inner knowing, that flame. That's what's coming up for
hmm
me. It's almost like there was a little
yeah,
flame lit, and you're
hmm
like, I can't ignore this anymore.
yeah. It's like a pilot light.
There's
It's
something
like
here. Yes,
yeah,
yes.
yeah. hmm and my real estate coach and several other people, they're like, Brandon, you're a really deep thinker. Like you process everything, and I'm the person that wants to see A through Z and how everything aligns. I can look at the big picture. I can see how little things move. I can see how this little like piece will change like the whole big picture. It seems very obvious to me, and so that's just how my mind works. My issue is that I am a big deep thinker, and sometimes I overthink, I overanalyze. Um, but that natural propensity to have to think and process internally and how it portrays itself externally has been something that's always kind of been with me. And even talking to my mom about it, she's like, no, you've always kind of been like that way. When I was in high school with friends, I was friends with a ton of people. I was one of the baseball stars like in high school. And I went to church and I was really big into my faith, and I had friends who like respected that. Like they didn't cuss around me, not because that they knew they
Yeah,
couldn't. They didn't care. We just had
yeah,
respect in our friendships and our relationships to say this is who Brandon is and this is what he has established. And so I think even from an early age to have those kind of conversations and to not ostracize people because of how I believed. And they weren't Christians at all
right.
either. They partied and smoked drugs. They're like, yeah, we're just not going to invite you because we respect you enough to do that. And
Yeah,
I think
yeah,
um, and so I think because of that, those things, even in high school, all the way through into college, kind of. So I look back at when I say we look back at our lives to see how we could move forward. I looked back at my life and saw what were the consistent themes that I weren't aware of at that time that I was doing, and then I codified them and understood them as what they were and put words to them to help me discover what my purpose and what brought me true joy in life was.
oh, that's so amazing. The purpose and authenticity are inextricably linked.
Yeah.
There is, as you step more into your authentic being, and
hmm
there a definition of authenticity that really resonated with me, and I want to ask you what your definition of it is being brave enough to be yourself and genuine enough to live according to your values, which is like
Mm,
exactly what you just highlighted, right?
yeah.
These were the things that mattered to me. These were the things that my heart soared, right? This is the core. And I love how you've even, which I definitely want to talk more about, is like how people around you, and we'll table
hmm
that for a second, but how once you step into your authentic self, like what happens to your sort of external world, because it does
hmm
change,
Yeah.
in, good ways and not so good ways. But what
Yeah.
would you say, like, what does the word authenticity bring up for you? And it doesn't have to be an exact definition, right?
No. To me it just comes down to having a deep understanding of your purpose and why you are here on this earth, and then operating in that. You see a lot of people who just don't know why they're doing what they're doing. A job's a job. You're a dad, but you're like there's a disconnect. Um, the people who have a deep and firm understanding of their why in their life and have hold on to that, I think that's where authenticity comes from. So until you can get to that place, true authenticity in terms of who you are, how you relate to others, and not feeling like you have to change to exist for somebody else, only can come from having that deep understanding of purpose. So like that's where authenticity comes from for me.
I love that definition. And I would piggyback on what you just said at the end. It's this deep understanding and inner knowing of who you are, what you stand for, and how you want to be in the world.
Yeah.
And that's obviously linked to your purpose because,
Right.
as we both know, and many of the listeners know, we're here to serve. Like our
Hmm.
ultimate reason for coming back to planet Earth and for coming to this place is to help others and
Yeah.
to continue to be and find love in the world. Right.
Hmm.
And I know that you and I share that. So it's one of those things where the word authenticity, I think it's had, I would say over the last maybe 10 years, there's almost been a negative connotation to it, right? Because I think people pushed a false narrative by
Hmm.
pretending that they were authentic to either for financial gain or for, like you mentioned, right, in college or high school, like gain into a specific group of people or to belong or all of those things. And
Hmm.
now the energy that's existing on planet Earth is not going to allow for that anymore. So here we have kind of this like very open sort of breaking down energy that's like, oh, okay, is that really you? Because guess
Yeah,
what?
it's interesting.
If it's
It's
not,
interesting that you say that. Right.
yeah.
Um, it's interesting that you say that because there's been several like YouTube videos and podcasts that I've watched from very different people. One of them being the future, like Christo, and
Yeah.
then another one being like Matthew McConaughey and Bert Kreischer from Two Bears Like One Cave, having these
Uh-huh.
very similar conversations of operating in uh, truly who you are. So like when you watch these people talk and communicate, they're not operating outside of like what they defined as who their personal brand is, how they operate, how they live in their life, and they're the same person on screen, off screen. And
Yeah,
I think it's interesting to see
totally.
that there are a lot of conversation, even on social media, being in content. How do you get creative content? I was like, well, you be like your true self on it. Like you don't try and be something. And even if it's very niched, you're still being niched, but you're not trying to create something that's not who you are. So you see, I fell into that trap of trying to create something like, oh, I'm just doing this because somebody told me that I had to do it, or this is just the way you do it. But now I'm discovering, I'm like, well, what content, what stuff do I want to put out there? And I'm doing it now because I want it. I want to learn it. I'm creating the content that I want to consume. And I'm starting to forget anybody else's influence because we're all individual. We all need different things. So people will attach to you because you're being you. So if you want to grow your following, you want to grow who you are. I'm like, the more you can be, the better off you are. But you also realize, and I've been saying this several times, and it's come up in different conversations of if you could be brave enough to share what's actually going on in your life, you'll actually probably be surprised, and it's not surprising to me anymore that there's somebody else going through the same stuff. Like you're not alone. But what happens is we sit here and we hide our true feelings, we hide what's going on, thinking that we're alone and thinking that nobody else gets it or understands it, which is far from the truth. Actually, the majority of people are probably going through the same thing that you're going through. Um, and I mean that like the majority of people are probably going through the same stuff you're going through. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
so if
No,
you can
amen.
operate in that and share it, then I've had a lot of really good conversations with people that I did never expected to, just because I'm like, hey, this is what's going on in my life. Here's what's happening. They're like, oh, actually, like I'm struggling with this too. And so now you get to bring your community together and you get to help in a way that you wouldn't have been able to if you hadn't shared what you were going through.
Bravo. There's so much to unpack there. That was, oh my God. First of all, I found you because of that.
Yeah.
Like I knew that, so shout out Go Coaching, who which is the first place we ever kind of sort of connected. We were on a Zoom call and I,
Yeah. Just little tiny
liked your
faces on the.
question. Yeah, like this little box, right? It's very 2024. But then I started following you and I saw a shift. And there was a few months, right? And I didn't really reach out. And then I saw a shift in your content. I'm like, wow, okay, I need to call him. And I reached out
Mm,
and we connected immediately and had a conversation. It is very, very difficult. And neither one of us are sitting here saying that what you just said is easy. I want to
yeah.
acknowledge
Right.
that because it's been our
Yeah.
whole lives on this road. However, when you get to the point, whether it's coaching or a friend, or you're just sick of your situation, or something big happens in your life and you're just like, screw it, I don't care, you become a little bit more risky. When you step into your authentic voice, it is amazing how the world opens up and the people that are brought to your doorstep.
Hmm. I think authenticity is like the key to unlocking whatever full potential you have in the world because people latch to it. So it's like we live our life to, I think, discover what that is, and some people have the ability through their circumstances, whatever, to kind of figure out what that is early on in life, and then there are
Right.
people who
I
go
did
their
not.
entire lives,
You did
you know,
not. Yeah.
you know.
Yeah.
And I know,
Yeah.
so a fascinating conversation I had is when I was a server, and there was this other server, and she was probably 30 years older than me, maybe more. We worked at a high-end steakhouse, and her and I butted heads all the time. Stupid things like she would not polish the silverware right, she would not polish the glasses
I
right,
have the same
and so
job. This is sending me right now.
like, and I was always the
Yeah.
one that would get on her and be like, because of the fact that I knew the proper setup of the silverware, and this is like
Right.
affects my income, it affects my money, it affects the guest experience. So like you not polishing it appropriately is like, and that could be the person like, oh, you're just whatever, but I'm like, no, like I was the top earning server there, I constantly got great. And so instead
Yeah.
of, I realized, I stopped myself and said, I'm just gonna let my actions speak louder than my words. I'm not going to tell people how to do their job, I'm just going to do my job. And then so I would go around here and I would just polish everything, I would just fix it, change it. She would get so mad at me. But then she followed me on social media. I got into real estate and I started having these, I don't know, she saw a shift. She's like, there's something different like about you. And we ended up having a conversation and she's like, I'm interested in getting into real estate. I was like, okay. So we sat down at Starbucks and I started going through this whole process. I was like, she's like, how'd you get to where you are? Like, how are you thinking the way you're thinking? Like, what's going on? I was like,
Yeah.
well, for me, I had the purpose conversation. I was like, I solidified what my purpose was and went through the process of discovering, like, who am I? Why am I here? And I codified it. It's to use the skills and resources that I have to help somebody else find success in their life. So no matter what it is that I'm doing, that's where I switched it into being a server. I'm using the skills and resources that I have to help somebody else find success. Whether it was the guest client and giving them the best experience, whether it was my coworkers, like that core of who I am is staying the same. And that's the shift that you saw. And so she just starts bawling, and we're in Starbucks. Like she starts crying, and she's like, "Never once in my life had I ever thought about what my purpose was." And so I think people have these unfortunate circumstances where maybe they just don't have the right people around them who are helping them
Right.
discover that, and that's a real thing.
Right.
And then there's other
Yeah.
people who have the wherewithal to go and find it, and some people are just living in a community and in a society in their world that they know, where that's built into their surroundings, the people that they know, like because they have people who are in leadership. So I think that discovering of the purpose and figuring out what that is, and unlocking the key to like your, I don't want to say happiness, like to your true joy, because you can have joy even in
Mm.
the midst of really tough
Yeah.
circumstances, right?
Sure. Yeah.
And happiness
Yeah.
is fleeting. So like what's that like, what's the silver lining in your life that's the core of who you are, and everything else around it changes, but like you still have that the silver lining is always there, right? Like that core, like being of who you are is there. To me, that's unlocking like prosperity or good life or whatever it is, but it comes out of discovering that authentic
Core.
self, because the world around you sees it too. Nobody wants to work with somebody or see somebody who's not being authentic, and you can feel it, whether or not that person even realizes that the little Brandon isn't out yet. and they're like, there's something about you that's off. I don't know what it is.
Yeah,
Like people feel that. Like I feel like
they do.
people's souls like are entwined. I feel like there's like you can really from the spiritual side of things, like you can really sense that. My wife is a really great judge of character from that. I'm like, I don't know how you sense these things in people. My sister's really good
Your
at that.
intuition.
And
Yeah.
because I'm the person, I'm like, I'm gonna figure it out. I'm gonna see A through Z and get everybody all the chances until like there's a wall. And she's like, nope, like that person's off. I'm not about it.
I love
And I
that.
have to discover it later on. But to me,
Yeah.
that's it. That's the like finding your authentic self is the key to living a life that you actually want and desire. And I think allows you to put yourself and change your environments and change your circumstances to allow to be able to experience that happiness or that joy. And that's what real estate was for me is I came from, multiple I came from working in the church and working in a restaurant where there's just kind of like bad leadership. And I
Yeah.
it was just really tough. And I'm like, I'm never gonna put myself in a circumstance where I'm gonna feel the way I felt working in like in those past experiences. And so now that growth and that looking back of where I'm at now, leadership in LAR, going to be treasurer next year, working towards presidency, doing real
Yeah.
estate, starting the media company. Like now I'm moving into discovering new aspects of my life that I wasn't able to yet until I was able to be like, who is my
Because
authentic self? And then also, because I'm going on a rant right now, once you discover your
it's
authentic
a
self,
great
I think it
rant.
gets a
Keep
little,
going.
I, once you discover your authentic self, I think it gets harder for you because now you have to be comfortable with having those conversations with people who are not going to be okay with you being who you are. And so you have to be in a situation so like to feel confident in your authentic self that when you step into those circumstances, you can either be a part of the change for people to for so that's why you better yourself to better your family to better your community. Once you do that, there's going to be as like as I as this like whole like as iron sharpens iron thing. Like there has to be friction to keep
Yes.
getting better. And so like yes, you are your authentic self, but like it's not going to be without hardship still.
Ugh,
So that's where like the joy aspect comes into play. Where like yeah, it's going to be hard, but you have this core of who you are that like you're willing to push through what's difficult because you have that innate desire in your being to make sure that you're living in that. And then so that's where you're going to go through the process of the other people haven't discovered that yet. Other people haven't had these conversations yet. Your job, your work, places you like you're either going to be a part of the change in those circumstances or you're going to have to move to better accommodate where you are. So it's either going to be one of two things. You're going to have to change your direction or you're going to have to be a part of the change with where
yeah.
you currently are.
That is, I love these
Boom.
conversations. It goes exact,
Yeah.
boom. First of all, boom. Two
Sometimes
things.
you say
So
stuff you're like, did
first,
I just say that?
it was freaking amazing. I'm like dying over here. I'm like, holy shit. Keep going. So, number one, let's pause. The very important piece of letting people really see you is scary. Stepping
Mm-hmm.
into the things that you never thought you would say to someone you love, stepping into the things that you never thought you would say to yourself. And then, like you and I are doing, stepping into a public forum and talking about it all is very, very, very difficult. But to your story with your former colleague and your reconnection with her, that will happen time and time again. So, for those of you that are listening that have stepped into this, you know exactly what I'm talking about. If you're teetering, right, and you're just not really sure, you're like, ooh, there's that little, I feel like just say it and see what happens. It will be amazing the responses you will get. However, there's two sides to every coin, right? We live in a world of polarity. So you're going to have, especially with this podcast, right? I will have things that people will say to me that will blow me away and burst my heart right open. And then I'll have other things that people will say that are just like, whatever. And it's all part of the same experience, right? And it's the same with your
Mm-hmm.
content. It's the same when you step into this version of yourself, there will be, dare I say, collateral damage.
Mm-hmm.
There will be people that cannot handle it. When you get clear in who you are, you become a mirror for people around you. And what that means, I'll give you an example. If you're somebody that starts putting boundaries in place, and say there's something that you've done your whole life, and there's all these people around your closest circle, and then all of a sudden you remove yourself from that, and you're like, nope, I'm not going to do that, or I'm not going to say that, or I'm not going to go there, or whatever it is. those people will inevitably be triggered because there's something inside of them that says, maybe I shouldn't do that too.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And then they push back a
And it's
lot,
uncomfortable.
hard. And then it's
Yes.
like, what's
And
wrong?
you
They're
can
like, what's
lose
wrong with
people.
you? Yeah,
Yeah.
because they go like, they're like, well, what's wrong with you? Like you changed all of a sudden.
Yes.
Like your framework
Right.
changed. I don't like it. It's
Right.
uncomfortable for me. So,
Right.
you have the good friends that will stick around, and you actually might realize, you might not have, like, they might not be the friends that you really needed. But I was
Yep.
having a conversation with somebody yesterday at a coffee shop, and it was that kind of conversation. They're afraid to put themselves in a public spot. They're a singer, and because they don't want to ostracize people around them, they always want everybody to feel included. But by doing that, it was a conversation we had was like, well, then you're not really kind of true to yourself. But if you put yourself in that situation and allow them to experience your um like who you are as a person, this is it's a conversation we had. One of two things will happen: either they'll accept you, or they won't.
Yeah.
So are you willing to have
It's
that?
pretty
And I think that's
simple.
just the
Yeah.
uncomfortable side of things. um
Right.
so I think I'm having way more conversations like this, which is why I feel like we need to talk about it more, because more and more people are feeling this exact same way of like, I really
Yes.
want to be me, but I'm having a really hard time struggling. I'm having a really hard time with feeling like other people might not accept me. And that's the
Right.
vulnerability that you have to kind of get past. And I think
Right.
um, everybody to some extent feels that way. So these
Absolutely.
conversations are
And
really powerful. I think they're super necessary.
totally. And we're not going to, on a bigger scale, right? Like on the collective macro scale, we're not going to solve all the problems that we need to solve with all the trauma and all the oppression and all of the control and everything that's happening in the collective. We're not going to solve that if we continue to be disconnected from ourselves. That was the whole point of me starting this podcast. I was like, God, I was sitting here in my apartment, locked down. I'm like, we are so disconnected right now. What is going to happen when this ends? And I thought, like,
Hmm.
oh shit, like this is going to be bad, right? Because now a disconnected collective has become even more disconnected because of many reasons. And then you have all this technology, which is great, but it
Hmm.
allows you to hide, whether that's
Yeah.
through anonymity on social media, which, by the way, is three quarters, if not 80% of your haters, people you don't
Hmm.
even know. And they don't know
Yeah.
anything about you. And again, you're the
Yeah.
mirror. Don't forget the mirror example, right? It's not about you, it's about
Hmm.
them. And how do we get back to years ago when you hung out with people on your block and you had a block party, or, your parents' best friends were your friends and you guys got together for holidays? It's like, how do we
Yeah.
get back to a place with everything that's happened and we can't go back, right? We want to get to a different place. We have to connect. And these
Hmm.
conversations through our purpose, through our why, through our authenticity, like all these things we talk about in the space between is what I truly believe is going to get us there. Like, call me
Hmm.
an optimist, but the more we break down our walls and become real with each other and be vulnerable and be true, the quicker we get out of this mess that we're in.
Yeah. You said something that reminded me, just when we talk about how do we get back to like our past or how things used to be done, because things are changing. And I don't know, what a lot of people feel or believe, but like I generally believe that there's a lot of stuff that just gets passed down generationally, like
Totally.
that people just aren't aware of. And so
Totally.
how difficult is it to change something that you're just like, it doesn't exist,
Right.
but like
You don't even know.
yeah, it existed like
Totally.
generations ago. So I think
Yeah.
that is another thing of just self-discovery. The
Mm-hmm.
question that got brought up to me before is like, is there a possibility that your journey of being your authentic self can't come to fruition in your life, simply because of the fact
Wow.
that it takes more time generationally to remove that stuff? So you have to think more so, how are my kids going to be able to not have to live the life that I live or deal with the things that I'm
Right.
dealing with? How are their kids going to? And how do you start living
Right.
that generationally? And then what are the
Right.
things 3 generations ago they were like, crap, I'm dealing with this thing that I didn't realize was a part of who I am, the
Right.
anxiety, the depression, the like whatever, like sickness, disease,
Traumas.
like traumas,
Yeah.
all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And I had
Yeah.
some really interesting conversations with my mom about her childhood, and I'm like
Right.
it's just so like just figuring it out, and her
Right.
talking about her parents. And so I think there's a lot more kind of quote unquote invisible things affecting how we're living and operating in our lives. And that's why I think life is discovering this is an ongoing thing. It's constant, because I don't think we can truly fix it and change it in a lifetime.
Yep. We can get closer. And
Sure, yeah.
I think, yeah, we can get closer because every
Hmm.
generation is a little bit further removed. I'm with you. I believe that so much of what's generationally um, built into our family unit or our extended family units actually lives within our DNA. But
Hmm.
here's what I'll say, it is proven now. We have been told for centuries that we can't change our DNA. We are given a set of whatever, and this is who you are. That is not true. We have been held within our personal power to heal. And I'm never going to cure all the generational trauma. I don't think that's why I'm here, right?
Hmm.
But I'm breaking so much of it because I'm digging as deep as I possibly can to not look away from what has brought the shadow side of me
Hmm.
because we're dancing
Right.
with many facets. Humans are very complex, right? So
Hmm.
you're dancing with all of that. And it's hard.
Yeah.
It's very, very hard. And I think, one thing I wanted to kind of talk about is how would someone either start or go deeper into finding their authentic self, right? I mean,
Mm.
for me, I started with talk therapy. And then I did a lot of spiritual courses. I did somatic work, so much of what's stored. We've done a bunch of episodes about the body. It all gets stored in our body, everything we've been through. So it's a layered process for me. But I always tell people just keep being curious and marching down the path, and you will continue to find yourself and
Mm.
unlock different pieces of who you are.
Yeah, I
So I don't
I
know
would
how you
agree.
would answer that
Yeah, I love the
question.
curiosity aspect of it.
Mhm.
I feel like you always have to question. Um, and for me, what I've done is I sought out help. When I was struggling with something, I would find somebody who I saw as the expert or had gone through what I've been going through, in whatever area that I'm struggling with. So if it's leadership stuff, I would find a leader that I trusted and had conversations. And like I would have like small conversations with some of the leaders to kind of pry and see like, can I actually really trust this person? And so there's a lot of hurt that has happened through that process and realizing, oh, they're not the
Yeah.
leader that I want. But then not shying away from that because that was a learning point. That was a discovery for me. Oh, this is not the leadership style that I was looking for. This is not what I really wanted. And so
Right.
I got to a point where leaders kept failing me over and over and
Yeah.
over and over again. And I'm like, life can't be this way. Like this can't like this has to be like some sort of human condition situation. And so like that's where the questioning comes in. Okay, like if it's consistent across the board with these things, like what's the thing? Like what's causing these people to be bad leaders? What's the bigger issue? What's the like what's happening? Because you see how history repeats itself. And there's a situation where like this one leader was fighting against this one thing, and then 10 years later they were doing the thing that they were fighting against. I'm like, what is that? How does that look? And
Yeah.
that's 10 years of discovery, right?
Right.
So I think the process is questioning and putting yourself in positions to like learn and better understand. So whether that's going through therapy, which I highly recommend people do, and finding a therapist you trust to really discover what that is for you, and then changing, it's everybody says it, you are the sum of the five people that are closest to you. So, changing who you're around, changing friend groups, which is one of the reasons why I hopped friend groups a lot because I'm like, I'm not getting what I really need. Not that I don't like my friends or I don't want anything. It's like
Yeah.
I just need to put myself in another community of self-discovery. And then that's where like diversity, equity, inclusion comes in for me. And I put myself in that because I needed to discover what that actually looked like. And I wanted to have people who thought differently than I did, who lived in a different
Totally agree with
like
that.
framework than I did.
Yeah.
I think we all live in boxes. So we have this box. I grew up in this box. It's the only box that I know. The only way for me to have a better understanding of myself and my surroundings is to like get outside of my box, because by learning somebody else's framework, it allows me to look back at my life and see it differently. And so that's where I think, from a tactical standpoint, is do that. Get around people who don't look like you, think like you, talk like you, and through that, you'll realize that it'll naturally get you to start questioning, like, do I believe this? Do I feel this? Do I like? And if you're comfortable enough to go through that, and if you can get to a point of authenticity, then you can do that without it kind of wrecking your life. And it's a very
Right. Because it
it
can
can
be
be very
jarring.
dangerous. Yeah, it can be very
Yeah.
jarring. It can be dangerous. You can get into stuff you can't. But if you can
Yeah.
help kind of create those safe spaces and be comfortable talking about them, um, and always be in self discovery mode, I think that's, to me, that's what I've done, and that's what I still do.
That's amazing that you brought that up because I hadn't even thought about that. But there's such a piece of me. That's one of the reasons why I wanted to move to New York. I wanted to be around a lot of people that did not have my same experience in every way, that didn't look like
Hmm.
me, that didn't speak the same language, that didn't have any. First of all, we're all individuals, right? Like, so we're not trying to say that's no two people are the same.
Right.
But if you have a small world view, your perspective is small. And in the bigness of the world and in all of the options that exist, that is where we're able to push outside our comfort zone and start actually questioning, who am I and what do I believe in and what do I want? You can't do that
Hmm.
when you're surrounded by a bunch of people like you. You just
Right.
can't. You
Hmm.
can try, but it's not easy. And then, like our friendship, we have so much in common, yet we couldn't be more different.
Hmm.
When you expand your circle, you're like, oh my gosh, we're all kind of the same. We all kind of want the same things because we're being ripped apart by a lot of energies that don't want us to be
Hmm.
cohesive, that don't want us to
Sure.
find common ground.
Yeah.
And it's our job, each one of us, to go and seek that out. I'm
Hmm.
so glad you said that. Thank you for
Yeah.
bringing that up. That's massive.
You're welcome.
It's so important. And
I think it's
especially
real though.
now.
Like it's yeah, people want to be comfortable and they want to stay in their
Yeah.
comfort. And like where there's comfort, there's no change, right? So if you want to be better, if you want to be different, like you have to be uncomfortable. You have to be okay with being uncomfortable. Like Gary Vee talks about it all the time. Just be comfortable being
Yeah.
uncomfortable. Like because that's where true growth comes from. And that's been a learning experience in my leadership ability. How do you have very difficult conversations where it's not a reflection of me disliking you or having it be something against like your character. It's just a difficult conversation of us better understanding one another's perspective. And then at the end of the day, we finish that conversation and we still don't really agree, but like I still don't dislike you as a person, as a human. We just think
Right.
differently, and that's okay. Like that's fine. I think and you see this, which is why I hate politics. You see it in politics all the time. Like you cannot believe this way, and if you do, like there's no way we can ever be friends. I'm like that level of conversation. I'm like I can't deal with that. I
Yep.
get that there's certain things that's like there are these like the line for you and the people that you want to interact with, but like
Yeah.
I don't, just because you think differently than I do doesn't mean that like I can't respect you and I can't learn from you and we can't interact with each other um at all. Like I just that I just don't agree with that. My wife is on the other side. She's like, I'm not gonna deal with it. Like I just don't want to.
Right.
But that's just
It's
where
fair.
I'm at.
It's hard. It's tough right now. We're being tested in so
Hmm.
many ways. That's a big test for
Yeah.
humanity.
Yeah.
And here, living in the good old US of A, it's been an even
Right.
more interesting test over the last like 10 years, right? We're
It's
definitely
hard.
being
It's
tested.
so hard. And like
It's
I
very
don't want to
hard.
get the polarizing topics of like whatever it might be. I'm like, in the grand scheme of things in this world, is it worth it? Like, is that the fight? Is that the war you want to like, is that the battle you want to fight? Because like for me, it's just not. I think there's bigger things to worry about than some of this stuff.
I could not agree more. Well, you and I have had these conversations, but I
Yeah.
could not agree more. I mean, but I think I love where, and unfortunately, we have to end our time together. Like, I can't even believe it's almost
Hmm.
over. But I think a lot of what you said about people having space no pun intended, for someone else's perspective, what
Hmm.
is the thing that you would want for the future when it comes to authenticity? And now I feel like this is authenticity for connectedness. That's kind of what's coming
Hmm.
up for me in this conversation. What would you want for the future? If you could rub your crystal ball, what would you want for the collective and the world in the vein of this theme?
Um, I mean, I would just love people to be okay with differences in thinking. Um, Diversity, equity, inclusion comes to mind for me, and I define it as um, it's a group of people who think differently than other people.
Yeah.
Like we all come from different backgrounds, we all come from different experiences. Like the thing that's consistent is because of that, we have different views of the world and different ways of thinking. And so if we could get outside of ourselves and be okay with learning and discovering other people's views and how they view the world. Like what's the thing where like it's like in a 2D world, if you have like a line drawn on like a table, if you look up, like it might say something, it's like this is the letter 12. But if you would
Okay.
change your perspective and look thin, like, oh no, it's just a thin line.
Right.
Like
It's all
somebody's,
perspective.
it's,
Life is
yeah,
all
it's
about
all
perspective.
perspective, right? So
100%.
when you look at life that way, you can see like, well, no, they just might have a different way of looking at this thing that I'm just
Different
maybe
view.
not aware of. And so for me, for the future, it's that like that connectedness of we can get away from polarizing somebody to the point that you hate them
Yeah.
and cannot at all. I'm like that's not a world that I want to
Or
be
bully
around or
them.
live in. Yeah, or bully them because of the differences. And I dealt with that. I was a bully, which is a whole other topic of conversation when I was a kid. And I think that was a lot of
Yeah.
that self discovery stuff too. It's like
A
I
lot
hated
of
the way I felt,
people.
you know.
Yeah.
Um, and so much so, I actually found that person like years later in
Oh,
before I went to college, and I saw them working, and I went to them like apologized. And this was like junior high. We had not seen each other probably in like 10 years, you know,
that's beautiful.
and like that's how much it weighed on my life. So I think
Yeah.
that is realizing there's like people are people. We at the end of the day aren't that different. And so if we all come from a perspective of love and acceptance, I think the world would be a better place. But
No,
truly,
it's true.
I
It's
think
not
yeah.
contrived. This is the age that we're in. We don't have a choice. It's
Hmm.
evolve or die, like for our species. I mean, it's that,
Yeah.
that's where we're at. And I
Hmm.
thank you for sharing that. And thank you for being you. I think to end it, the authentic self, you become so much more tolerant and loving towards other people when you're living in your authentic self. Because look how far
Hmm.
you've come to have that conversation with your coworker and to go back and talk to that person that you might have done wrong in junior high, which is so young to even have that kind of self awareness. And your self awareness is so beautiful, right? It's
Hmm.
just such an inspiration. And that's the thing that I want to end today with for the listeners out there. Brandon is in his authentic self. I'm in my authentic self. And what will inevitably happen is the world around you will just change because you're being who you came here to be. And people say, well, how can I make a difference? I'm just one person. What the hell do I know? It's that powerful. We are that powerful. And I want the listeners to continue to step into their power and step into their authentic self and be vocal and be you.
Hmm.
Just be you. And thank you, my friend, for being on here today.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
And where can people connect with you? We'll throw it down in the show
Um,
notes, like Instagram. What'll be best?
I mean Instagram, Facebook. Instagram's Hey
Okay,
BMJ, just
cool.
Hey
Hey,
BMJ. And then Facebook, Brandon Moore Johnson. So
beautiful. Well, we'll link
those
them
are our
below.
most active. Absolutely. It was an
Thank you for
absolute
doing
pleasure,
that.
as always. You're a
Thank you.
kind
Thank
and
you.
gracious human being.
Oh, ditto. And thank you to all the listeners for joining us today on The Space Between. And we will see you very soon for another episode.
The space between.
Thank you so much for joining us in The Space Between. We hope this conversation sparked connection for you. Please like, subscribe, and share this episode with someone who will find value.
And make sure to tune into our next episode as we continue the journey into the core themes of our lives. We'll see you again in the space between.